Morning, afternoon, evening, everyone. Welcome to the session 10 Years of Start Fund, the good, the bad, and the ugly of pooled funding. My name is Serena Soon. I lead the Start Funds team, which manages the Global Start Fund and national funds in Bangladesh and Nepal. Today, we have a very exciting panel, so I'm keen to introduce them. But before that, just want to give a brief overview of the session before I introduce our panel. So as many of you are aware, Start Network is a diverse global membership of local, national, and international NGOs that is collectively working to drive system-level changes in the way that humanitarian action is approached and delivered. The concept of a global humanitarian fund was one of the network's earliest innovations. It was designed as a deliberate departure from systemic tendency to be reactive in responding to crisis, for funding choices to be driven by media headlines and political interests, and decisions predominantly taken by those holding the purse strings. This concept evolved into the Start Fund, a global pooled fund that provides early and rapid financing to underfunded small to medium scale crises, with decisions and humanitarian action led by our NGO members at the forefront of those crises. As the title says, this year we're celebrating 10 years of Start Fund. The first Start Fund alert was raised in April 2014 in South Sudan for response to food insecurity. With the support of a community of donors, we heard from several of them earlier today. The Start Funds to date has since gone on to disburse more than £147 million in anticipation of and response to urgent humanitarian needs in 82 low and middle income countries worldwide. So I'm very excited to be joined today by several panels, speakers. So I'm just going to share my screen to show you a bit of the information that we have. So Start Network members, fellow pooled fund practitioners, and critical friends of the Start Fund, as we hear from them on the good, the bad, and the ugly of pooled funds as a humanitarian finance mechanism. So I want to introduce Ahmed. He's the Deputy Director and Head of Programs of Save Somali Women and Children, SSWC, a member of the Start Network Somalia Humanitarian Hub, and an advisory board member of the UN Somali Humanitarian Fund. Next is Nico. He's the Global Lead for IFRC Disaster Response Emergency Fund, DREF, a fellow pooled fund practitioner. DREF is a pooled fund also for small and medium-sized disaster for national societies of the IFRC movement and has been active since 1979. Last but not least, Pankaj. He's the country director for World Hunger Hilfe in Bangladesh. He is one of Start Network's trustee and he sits on the Start Fund Strategic Committee, the governance body of the Start Fund. So let me stop sharing screen so that we can see our speakers on the screen. So I think it would be great if we can start with some positive first. Let's begin by looking at the good of Start Fund and Humanitarian Pooled Fund before we look into the challenges that we have seen. Pankaj, can I hand over to you first around what stood out to you as the value add of Start Fund to the humanitarian sector?
Thank you, Serena. I think the value addition from Start Fund, and specifically talk from the trustees board and also my engagement with Start Fund Bangladesh, is that this has enabled more rapid disbursement of funding to the humanitarian crisis, with NGO practitioners making decisions. So they didn't depend upon the headquarters to make that decision, and what was available and those emergencies which were forgotten or which needed quick attention were immediately given money to this. So this was quite helpful at the country level, and we really appreciate that. Thank you.
Thanks, Pankaj. Nico, can we hear from you as well, from our fellow pooled fund practitioner? Like, what do you see as the value add of pooled fund to the humanitarian sector?
Thank you very much, Serena. I would say that the added value that DREF is bringing today is built from 45 years of experience, because this year we are celebrating this big anniversary for the DREF. And we are building on more than 600 million Swiss francs that have been disbursed for emergency response to reach 200 million people, vulnerable people affected by disaster. This helps us really to push the drive to evolve, to be more flexible, to develop new modalities and push on the localization agenda. One of the greatest added value, I would say, of Pool Fund is the role we're playing on localization. And with the drive, it's over 76% of the total fund that is allocated to national society, implemented by them directly and reported again. So on the localization, that would be the first one. I could also mention anticipatory action, which is a new pillar that has been added to the fund back in 2021 with pre-agreed funding that have now in place for national society. The digitalization of the fund as well, so now allocation, request and reporting are all made online, so it helps our local partners to do everything directly and streamline our processes. And the last 2 points I would like to mention is the draft insurance mechanism that has been put in place last year has been activated for the first time this year. So it's the first humanitarian pool fund that benefits from non-parametric insurance that have already covered 7.2 million Swiss francs this year. So it helps us to reach several million people thanks to this new insurance product. And the last is the feedback mechanism that we have just launched to not stop and just sit on our benefits and added value, but keep improving for the benefit of vulnerable people. Over.
Thanks, Nico. And yeah, congratulations to the draft. Also a big milestone, and excited to hear a lot of similarities between the Start Fund as well as draft in terms of our intention to drive locally led action as much as possible. And on that note, want to hand over to Ahmed, who has a lot of experience with the SHF and also being a local national actors engaging in the SNAP network. Ahmed, over to you.
Thank you very much, Serena. I would like to clearly point out that the Somali Humanitarian Fund has reached a significant number of people in need over the years that it has been existing. It's also important to note that from our side, it is open to national and local NGOs. So therefore, there are no restrictions, unlike some other funds that have a bit of restrictions. And we have more national NGOs open and qualified to seek these funds than international. So also it's important to say that SHF upholds as guided by the Grand Bargain Commitment, which is dedicating at least 25% of the funds to local actors. Luckily, in this fund, we have surpassed by awarding local actors more than 76%. That is as at August 2024, where almost 42 national partners benefited, 11 INGO partners benefited, and that was a total of almost $28 million. We've just recently, just 2 days ago, awarded $5 million, and only one INGO benefited, and the rest were local partners. So the advantage of local actors working in hard-to-reach areas has given an opportunity for to access more funds than our counterparts. Of course, it's not about competition, but also where one fits to reach the people in need. And over the years, it has also strengthened the capacity of local actors due to its rigorous capacity due diligence process. So that has been improving local actors or national actors to set the standard a bit higher so that they can benefit more and more from the opportunities. Over to you. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. From what you have shared, how the pool funds, how Start Fund, how DREF, how SHS have been driving locally led action and its rapid humanitarian mechanism to hopefully encourage early action, as Pankaj have mentioned, decision-making is rapid. It seems it's all very good. But from the title of the session, we did say there's ugly, there's bad side of it. And from the experience of all of you engaging with Pooled Fund, we'll be keen to hear from you, what is not working from your perspective? What can be done better in terms of Pooled Funds in general? Pankaj, would be great to hear from you first around what's your experience with the Start Fund Bangladesh, with the Global Start Fund around what is not as working as well or as smoothly?
you. So, something which we have realized both in working in Bangladesh and globally is that, when we talk about localization in certain aspects, so, the decision making is in the hand of few people or the few agencies which is there. So those who are small community-based or local organizations are not able to get it. And the reason being is that they have capacity gaps because of, as a result, they are not able to meet the compliance requirements. So we have that kind of scenario which comes up, which is very important for us to understand it. There is also in terms of inconsistency in terms of decision making. Say, for example, those who are very powerful, they are able to influence it because you are able to generate more pressure. You are able to do this, collaboration and other things, which becomes also very sometimes, very tricky. The final thing is that there is a lot of competition rather than working together. There's a competition that who gets the money, who does not get the money, and what basis it gets the money. It is not only about the quality of the proposals, but also whom do you know and how you are able to influence them. I think this is the other side of the story which also people should be aware of it. Thank you.
Thanks, Pankaj. Raising the issue of power and also decision making within pooled funds. It's delegated decision making. It's like decision making no longer being held by donors, but to practitioners. But at the same time, we still see that power playing out within the decision makers. Nico, curious to hear, do you have similar observation in draft or different observation?
I can only echo what Pankaj has just been mentioning. We're a membership organization as well, so the game of power is also affecting us. So the Start Fund, the Start Network is not you are not alone in this situation. We share your burden as well. But on top of that, I would like to say that I think all the humanitarian pool fund have gained momentum over the last few years, and we see the pressure, but also the volume that of financial transaction that we're implementing have grown significantly, which attracts the interest from donors, of course, but on the other side, it pushes us to be stronger in terms of accountability, transparency, and risk management. We continue to work on accountability and transparency, that's our leitmotif, and on risk management, we have invested a lot recently on developing new tools, new processes, which have been conducted without parallel consideration for keeping the simplicity for our national partners. So those levels which are good, I'm not saying I'm against risk management and compliance, but it's just that we have developed it very quickly without consideration for the over complexity that this has brought to the system that we're operating today. And the bureaucracy that we have added on the shoulders of partners who are on the front line of disaster response and need a part of flexibility and still some easy money. So I think at some point we have delayed a bit where the money is needed and where the support is needed when it's needed. So it will be important for us to continue developing risk management and transparency, of course, but also ensuring that we don't compromise the humanitarian impact that we're supposed to have on the ground. And today this pushes us to ask questions with our risk management team. Where is the biggest risk for the draft? Is it on the financial transaction, or is it on the potential delay and lack of humanitarian impact that we have on the ground and support that we provide to our partners? So that's a question that we're trying to address today. Over.
Thanks, Nico. So you bring in another kind of element of the pool fund. As we said in the beginning, was supposed to be rapid. It's supposed to speed up the process, enable access. But slowly, we gradually have more demand, and then we build on it, and it become, in a way, clunkier than we initially envisioned, and also with the decision-making area as well. Ahmed, do you see something similar in the Essex draft or from your experience accessing pooled funds?
Yeah, absolutely. We share similar experience. We are talking of bureaucracies. In this fund, we are a bit different from the Start Fund. Of course, here there are clusters that are involved in decision making. There's the Somali Humanitarian Fund management that also involves in part of the decision making of awarding proposals, projects. The advisory board role is basically advisory and strategic. It does not distribute resources, but it strategically puts the resources to the direction required. However, how it's shared down there, technically, it's the clusters and the fund management. So, of course, there are a lot of conditions, filling the 5W matrix, attending the coordination meetings, and so forth. And this is not possible for some of the partners, depending on the location and area they are. So that hinders some of these local actors also benefiting from the opportunities. There is dominance of certain actors also, members who are maybe popular in that cluster or have the links, the connections to ensure they get the resources. So whoever makes the loudest noise gets the fair share of the resources. That is something that is common. Another thing is there are a lot of partners that are not qualified for this funding, basically because they did not go through due diligence by the fund management, and not because they were not ready, but because it is not available, particularly the resources are not available for the fund management to carry out the assessment. That is a challenge. So that means there are many partners that are not in, getting the opportunity to participate in implementing some of these projects. Another thing that I usually see, not only these funds, but generally pool funds, are there's limited accountability from the donors, since pool fund are shared by different part donors, and everybody contributes a little bit, so they think this little bit is not important to follow up much. So, and that makes the whole fund, not be looked at into critically by the donor. So that might be also a factor. Over to you. Thank you.
Great, thank you all. So I'm hearing is very interesting. It seems like the strength of pooled fund that we have highlighted in the first question is also, in a way, also proving is still a lot more progress needed around enabling access to local actors. So we talked about the bureaucracy, about the due diligence burden that is a lot of the local actors to be able to access pooled fund. Many of them may not even have a way for them to even approach those pooled funds to gain access. And there's like discussion around the, even when they have gained access, there's a lot of competition within the pooled funds, as well as like power dynamics being played out in the decision-making aspect. So it's still not like a level playing field within the pooled fund, but we see areas that has been used to move that forward. So I'm curious to hear from your perspective, with all of those reflections that you have from your engagement with pooled fund, what do you see as the missed opportunities that pooled fund has over the years that it hasn't really been able to push into, missed opportunities? Ahmed, can I start with you on this one, like around missed opportunities, seeing that you mentioned quite a few areas from a local national actors perspective?
Yeah, I think an opportunity that has been missed is to increase the funding base, and that is the primary cause of all these challenges. Once we have enough, funds pooled and mobile, we're able to crisis all the time, sure that every partner location, any location they are, at least they're responding to some of these challenges. That's an opportunity we missed over the years. There are also the bureaucracies of accessing these funds, I think, is something that can be changed, or making sure that at least they are less, so that the challenges become less and less. The issue of decision making by a few also is something that can be looked at. I think if we look at those key items, things will have gone well, I believe. Over.
Okay, around increasing funding, which is quite challenging, as we have heard, I think, yesterday and today, where the donor funding is going down across the board. And there's a lot more traction about looking at pooled fund as a way to kind of pool those limited resources. But yes, I think that's an area, hopefully there will be additional resources available. Pankaj, can I hand over to you, like from your perspective, what would be the missed opportunities that you have seen from your experience with Start Fund Bangladesh and the Global Start Fund?
I think one of the very interesting thing, because Start Fund has been functional for the last 10 years or so, and in many countries it was programs. Say for example, we have Nepal, we have Bangladesh, etc. But sometimes what happened, the amount of the funding is very small, but it is quite fast for people to able to access it. And once they're able to access it, there is no follow-up which is done that whether other donors are also meeting the needs or not. So there is no follow-up which happens. There is no advocacy from the members and from the secretariat in that particular country that the donors are willing to do. That's one part of it. The second part of it is that, because start fund nature is to provide fast and quick immediate response to that particular thing. But we are talking about changes in the humanitarian architecture, the strategy of start fund. But there is no like other needs which needs to be taken up, be it in terms of recovery, rehabilitation. We don't have a strategy. We don't need to do it ourselves, but we at least need to advocate it with others how to do it. The third part of it is that in many countries, wherever we have seen start fund, there is also recurrent things which keep on happening. So we say that the members they raise the alert, but this same alert might have been risen 2 years earlier. So when we do the alert note or when we do this kind of a thing, we don't analyze that in that same thing whether these things had happened and what we did it. So we see that like money is going toward the same issue over years and years and years in certain countries what we have seen it including Bangladesh. I think that's a missed opportunity. The concept is very good, but when you operationalize it you find these challenges, so it needs to be fixed up somewhere and some kind of a thinking needs to come into that account. Thank you.
Thanks, Pankaj. So it's around looking at, we have limited resources, as Ahmed has flagged that resources are not enough. And how do we optimize that resources to look at leveraging additional donor interest or additional resources on the ground? And hopefully, as you said, as you addressed, we learn from what we have done and hopefully use the funding to address new needs that has been identified, like optimizing the funding that we have. Great, that's a very good point. And I think that is something that for Start Fund, we should look back and then see how we can optimize that and leverage additional resources together with members. Nico, from your end, from DREF experience as well as engaging with the Start Fund through our learning exchanges, any best opportunities that you see from your side?
Thank you, Serena. I wouldn't say missed opportunities, but rather an opportunity ahead of us that it's really time for all of us to catch it on how can we strengthen and reinforce the coordination and the collaboration between humanitarian pool fund. And I'm not talking only about our international organization, but better connect with all locally led organization, grassroots organization, national country-based pool fund. On the technical side, I think we have a lot to learn from each other. I think we went through different challenges and added value that we just exposed during this panel discussion that all the organization can benefit. We can learn from each other and we can provide and transfer some experience to help emerging pool fund avoiding going through the same mistakes or same challenges. On the advocacy side, I think we have a lot to play, and it's also linked with what Pankaj and Ahmed have just said. I think we can join forces for advocating for more flexibility, more localization towards donors, to develop collaborative research, share studies, which I think it's a crucial next step that the different humanitarian pool funds should take on. And one last point, I think it's really important that we also provide the space for national organization, local pool fund. We have big voices with large and organization, but it's really important that we respect and elevate the perspective of organization coming from the ground. So it's really important that they have a space as well to speak. Over.
Thank you. I think all of the missed opportunities that was shared, that it kind of comes in quite nicely together is how do we leverage all of the pool fund, the limited resources that we have, we see, and we'll continue to see as funding goes down, I think, and the needs continue to grow. How do we make sure we leverage the relationship, the resources that we have? Just to conclude, before we go into the question and answer part, would be great to hear from each of you, like a key message. Like, what would you like for our audience to take away from? Like looking at the Start Fund 10 years now, ESIC Chef, I think, was over 10 years, I think. And Nico, you mentioned DREF is like 45 years. What would pooled fund, next for pooled fund for the next 10 years? Pankaj, can I hand over to you first for like the key message for what next?
So I think from the start fund perspective, from the global perspective, we would like to learn more. We would like to learn what others are doing, like what IFRC is doing, or what Somalia is doing. We also have UNOCHA fund. I think something we can talk in terms of communities of practice or the knowledge sharing between each other, because it's so important to understand. But remember that pool funds is not only for this. In some countries, we also have climate change related pool funds also. So it's important that how do pool funds work in different contexts? What are the different learnings? How do we make sure that it truly reflects localization into context, not in terms of principle, but in terms of delivery? Because this is what we are all looking for, and we want to move forward. There is no right or wrong answer here. As we keep on doing, we will keep on learning and we will keep on improving. I think that's something which I would say. Thank you.
Thank you, Pankaj. Nico, over to you.
Thank you. I will start by echoing what has been mentioned by Pankaj. I'm in full agreement with what has been said. From my perspective, I would say that in 10 years, I would like that we push even further the localization efforts. And I think prepositioning the fund as much as we can at country level is one way that we want to see the draft developing for the next 10 years. And the last point is, it's true that we are learning. We have been discussing today about funding, about process, about operation. But for me, the most important is that in 10 years, we do not forget that our focus at the end of the day is the people. It's the single mother, the unaccompanied minors, the children, the elderly, which are the people for whom we are working. So whatever we develop on humanitarian pool fund, we should always keep in mind that we're working for people that are vulnerable and affected by disaster. Over.
Thanks, Nico. Ahmed?
Thank you, Serena. I think I'm in agreement with my colleagues also on the issue of localization. Actually, instead of increasing, I am advocating for maybe in the next 10 years, I want to see 100% funds dedicated to local and national actors fully. Another important aspect also is to not only concentrate on the quantity of funding, but also the quality of funding. We need funds that are always available and flexible. Those are, I think, important aspects that we need to look at in the near future. Then, lastly but not the least, let's not only concentrate on emergencies, but how can we fund or use this opportunity to reduce shocks on communities, like disaster risk reductions, community resilience, the nexus funding. I think these are things that we need to look at in the next 10 years so that we see a difference within the communities that we work with. Over to you. Thank you.
Thank you all for the rallying call around what we should look to do next and continue to maximize the value of the pool funds and hopefully to mitigate some of the bad and the ugly that we have seen so far. So I think the next session, we're keen to have a bit more like interaction with some of the questions or even like comments that we have received in the chat. So far, I think quite a lot of people have mentioned, like, and also the panel, you have mentioned the need to coordinate better, to learn from other pool funds a bit better. Would be interesting to hear from you, like any practical examples of how pool funds can coordinate or collaborate better from your perspective. Yeah, anyone would like to come in? Nico, would you like to kick us off?
Yeah, sure. But I think the first point I would like to say is to remain simple and to start with some solid basis, not being too over-ambitious, I would say, but starts a bit like the experience we have between the START network and the IFRC with some technical discussion, meeting the team, encouraging for the collaboration, for the communication, and communicate as much as possible. I think we did it both from the start really, especially on the insurance, when we shared experience on the technical side, on the challenges. We have this event coming up end of November where the team will meet in person in London. I think that's the first point. Also, it's good to remember that, of course, the Red Cross movement, the Red Cross Red Crescent movement has its priorities. We only work with national societies, so we have a different mandate that INGOs and the UN. I think we are complementary to each other, and to allow the space for other organizations to learn, I think it's important to have kind of neutral organization or platform to help us coordinating in between. So it's not only the Drive for Start that should lead, but having maybe EVA or other organization in between to help facilitating the exchange between us. And really roots up the voices from the local organization to tell us how they would like to see this coordination happening. What do they need to have a sense in our coordination, not coordinating for the sake of it, but for the end users and other partners that really need to learn from us. Over to the colleagues.
Thanks, Nico. Just to build on that, I think, Start Network and IGFA has been in touch with a lot of pooled funds that we have sprung up over the past, I think, couple of years. We saw a lot more pooled fund being used as a platform to encourage more locally led humanitarian action. And I think we are now looking at a community of practice with those pooled funds. So hopefully, in a way that we are driving that learning, cross-learning, and in a way, as you said, we did have a lot of around advocacy need that hopefully we can do some joint messaging through that community of practice. Pankaj, Ahmed, I'm not sure if you have from like a Bangladesh and from a Somalia perspective, like from a country level, do you see any coordination examples that would be good to share?
Sorry, so from Bangladesh, there is a couple of very interesting things which they do. So because the kind of work they do it, they also coordinate with different UN agencies, be in terms of there is no overlap of the beneficiary, which is very interesting. Second, in terms of packages, like if you do multiple cash transfer, the amount of money which you give, you also do that kind of common framework which you take into account, which is also very interesting. Third thing, I think there is a whole trigger mechanisms, be it in terms of anticipatory action or be it in terms of response. So there is a common needs assessment which is being used, and those common needs assessment is being used to draw the proposals, which is being used by different agencies or different pool funds which needs to be done. And when we talk about trigger mechanisms in anticipatory action, we are very fortunate to say that Bangladesh is one of the countries which has got standard protocols for floods, for cyclones, etc., which Start Fund uses and other users. I think this is a very good example for it. But now, as we are telling that we need to move one step forward, as we are learning, we need to take it much more further. We need to much more further refine it, because this is what the future is. And why? Because in global trustees and the Start Fund, we say, why do people want to fund Start Fund? Why do they want to channel the money? Because we want to channel the money because we want to coordinate. We want to make sure that the local NGOs are being supported. We want to make sure that there is a value for money which is over there, which the donors would not have been able to do directly. I think those are some of the things which are very good examples which we should always keep in mind. There is no problem with the idea, as I'm telling. It's about how do we implement it, how do we take it forward. And I mean, from the network and from the trustee board, this is what we are also expecting that in the future we will be talking about. This would be humanitarian, changing the humanitarian architecture in a true sense, to which Start Fund has been pioneer, and it has done very good work, and we should really appreciate that it has done a very good work. There might be some pits and falls, but this can be further improved. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for sharing the Bangladesh context, Ahmed.
Thank you, Serena. I think it's important to learn from each other. The main aspect here is about learning. I know there are a lot of pool funds. Like, for instance, Somalia, the only advantage is that it has done localization very well. I can't talk of the quality, but at least in terms of quantity, the localization agenda has been perfectly done. And that's one area maybe the Start Network and others can also learn from. And there's a lot that we need to learn from others as well. However, the percentage of these funds is just 2.5% compared to what comes into the country in terms of humanitarian funding. That itself shows that however much you're doing well, you're not still going anywhere in terms of localization. So that's something that we need to learn from each other. Another important thing is the standardization of capacity assessment tools and how capacity assessment is done throughout the processes. And that makes the difference between superior and non-superior partnership within this funding. I think if we look, even if however small it is, we have a small platform called Nexus, which is kind of pool fund, but for only specific members. There's a lot to learn from that small consortium, even if it's Star Network or the Somali Humanitarian Fund. And there's a lot the small network can learn from others. So it's time to explore the opportunities and look deeply what is done well on the other side.
Great. Thank you for the call. I think from all of the panelists, just to encourage Pool Fund to really look at sharing learnings. I think it's the openness of like sharing and openness to learn from each other is something that Pool Fund should really look into, because I think we've been through, I think DREF has 45 years of experience and Start Funds 10 years and SHF, I think since 2010. So as we all said, I think it's that importance of learning from each other and being open and transparent with the challenges that we have faced. So some of the audience have flagged a question, which I think a few panel speakers have already alluded to. It's around access for local national actors. So the question is, how can pooled funds better align our practices and processes to improve access? As many of you have mentioned, bureaucracy, added pressure, like how can we improve our practices and processes for LN NGOs especially? Any colleagues like to comment on that?
Yes.
Sorry.
Okay, Pankaj, go ahead.
Something which we are learning in Bangladesh is to build up, like before providing funds, is to build up capacities of those local NGOs in terms of what is expected to out of Start Fund when if you apply for a member, be in terms of compliance, finance management, procurement, etc. Because they are not able to access this. I think that preparatory phase or that can is something very, very interesting, because if I see the other hat of mine, where even if you do this civil society strengthening, this is how you build up them and this is how do you do that. I think that would be very useful. We should not assume that the local NGOs or the NGOs which are at the grassroots level will have those kinds of policies. So it's so important to strengthen them and start thinking.
Thanks, Pankaj. Ahmed?
Yeah, I think we need to look at capacity from two angles. Sometimes we say the elephant in the room is this capacity issue, and now that's how local actors miss opportunities to access these funds. We can only improve local actors accessing these funds by deliberately putting measures in place, such as saying over 70% of these funds going to local and national actors, or the way I suggested, in the next 10 years, let's see all these funds dedicated to local actors, because it is not even more than 3% of the total amount of funding that goes to humanitarian, which is largely accessed by NGOs and UN agencies. So the issue of saying capacity, I think, has been, there's nobody who can do better than a local actor that has been implementing activities within those communities for a period of time. You cannot tell us that an NGO that comes from elsewhere will achieve that. It's not possible. So let's have dedicated funds to local actors. That's the only way we can achieve this.
Thank you, Ahmed. Yeah, Nico, do you come in?
Yeah, thank you very much. Yeah, in agreement with what has been said, I think on the capacity enhancement of local partners, it's sometimes needed, sometimes not. Sometimes it's also providing them the space, so have some platform at country level that puts everyone on the same line. Of course, From the different pool fund, you found different end users. So for the START network, it will be NGOs. For us, it will be Red Cross entities or Red Crescent entities. From the UN, probably UN agencies and then implementing partners. But having a platform of coordination at local level, at national level, is important to ensure that all the partners are on the same level of knowledge and capacities to be able to implement and report against the funding transfer. But I think on the other side of the chain, on the other end, it's a role not for the local platform, but for the global platform that we are, to really advocate towards the donors to provide some shared principles for the donors to fund us in the same way. If all the donors from the global pool funds with the same principle, the same indicators and the same requirements, then the requirement that we will ask our local partners will be the same. And that will put them on the same level of requirement that they have to provide. So that might ease also the transfer of fund and the risk sharing with the local partners. Over.
Great, thank you. So from dedicated funding, more dedicated funding to local national actors, as well as looking at requirements from the donors that often get passed on to local national actors in the front line around reporting requirements, even due diligence, where we are looking at passporting due diligence. Hopefully that will minimize the burden around local national actors accessing multiple different pooled funds or even bilateral grants with specific donors or areas that definitely we can look into. So I think that was another question is like slightly pivoting from just looking at the pool funds, how do we make pool fund more accessible? Is there any advice you have for local national actors, especially on the call, who would like to access pool fund? What would be your advice for them if they want to start looking at accessing pool funds? Ahmed, any advice from your end?
I think the best advice is to try to improve your visibility, ensure that from the way the system is currently, it's trying to improve the visibility of those particular, organizations. Also ensuring that you are aware of the conditions that are there. The way my colleague Nicolas said, if you are not fulfilling the requirements of the donors of the fund, then you will not get the funds automatically. So there are requirements and procedures for every pool fund that exists, whether it's the START Network pool fund or the Somali Humanitarian Fund or others. So try to understand the requirements and ensure that you are there to this. As we also, those of us who are sitting in decision-making platforms, try to improve on easier ways that the local and national actors can access the funding.
Thank you, Ahmed. Nico, do you want to come in?
Yeah, in the same line as Ahmed, I would say do not be afraid of asking. That's the first thing. Try, test, and learn. But also be aware and communicate about your capacities, but areas that you need to improve. In the draft, there is one modality that we call the search deployment. So if a national society doesn't have much experience in implementing funds from the draft, they can request the deployment of a search, multiple search, even of different technical people that will be able to deploy in country to help them to implement for the first time a draft. Even they can request search in other operation in the future, but I would say all the partners are here to help you. You are not alone in this on this road, so do not hesitate to ask the support from partners. Yeah.
Great, thank you. Pankaj, any advice from your end?
I would agree to what Ahmed and Nicholas has mentioned. Just one thing to add, try to get accompaniment support from those who are willing to provide you. This will give you a hand-holding support how to access it. Apart from visibility and other things, this will increase your confidence, and over the period of time, you will really be able to access. Thank you.
Great, thank you all for the very practical advice. Taking notes here as well. Hopefully we can also add it to how we can advise our local national members within the START network. I think we are running out of time, and I would like to end on a question that kind of takes us from the humanitarian sector to beyond that. I think Ahmed, Pankaj, you briefly have mentioned that as well, as in like how do we see beyond the start fund alert cycle, see beyond humanitarian project management cycle, and look into like longer term, look at disaster risk reduction, resilience, and even climate financing around that area. So we had a question from online audience as we look at how can we practically share the learnings from humanitarian pooled funds to inform pooled funding across the wider sector, across the nexus that we have seen with other civil society actors. As we have seen, there's a lot of pooled fund out there, not necessarily for humanitarian crisis per se. So yeah, any advice on how we can look beyond the humanitarian sector and go beyond from that side?
Like,
I think let me start and it will be less than a minute. Actually, every fund has its own rules and regulations. So if it has been set when it was starting as a humanitarian fund, definitely that it's what it will going to remain until there will be change of procedures of that particular fund. So I'll maybe encourage other sectors, particularly those who are working on resilience and so forth, to consider similar platforms. However, even if we have programmed ourselves in a humanitarian way, there is need also to look at this has not worked for over the years. There have been challenges. So how can we do better? How can we just try to improve on what we have started? Because we are solving the same problem year out, year in. So the best way is to change our tactics a bit, not 100% moving from the humanitarian aspect, but also contributing to the resilience, the climate financing and so forth, so that our challenges will keep on reducing, and what we're going to be responding to every other time will keep on becoming less and less until we're out of the humanitarian situation. Or alternatively is to coordinate with other sectors, the triple nexus and other key important sectors, coordinating and ensuring that we are addressing the challenges at the same time can make us overcome all these challenges. Over to you.
Thank you. I think we're running out of time. Apologies. I got a bit too excited and keep asking questions. You can tell I'm really passionate about this topic. And I do hope thank you for the panel speakers for sharing your insights with us. So I think we are looking at wrapping up the online SNAT Network Assembly with one final session. So I encourage our audience online and our speakers to join the next session on closing reflection from our board. Please go back to the attendee hub and join the session there. Yes, so I want to end on thank you, Nico, Pankaj, and Ahmed, for your time and also for sharing your experience and being open about the challenge that you have seen. Thanks, everyone, and hope to see you in the next session.
thank you.
Thank you very much for the opportunity.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.